Well, Shane McGraw, it is awesome to be here with you, and I'm glad that you said yes to meeting with me.
Yeah, it's easy to do. I have a lot of respect for you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for that. So really today, what I wanted to do is start with your early life. And, this is built around how do we raise the next generation of boys into solid men. And I couldn't think of, there's lists of guys that come to, and you have been in my life, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But you just strike me as this guy that is very intentional, very forward thinking and moving, has been very analytical about his life. And so I wanted to, start at ground zero and work through that, and through your childhood, talk about, you're growing up, moving into military, into faith and business and next steps and family and all of that kind of stuff. And if we don't get through it all, that's okay. But just, tell us a little bit about Shane.
Well, actually, it's funny that you bring it up because the last couple months have brought some of the past into the forefront of my today. And I've been kind of wrestling with this idea of 3 dads. So humor me for a minute and I'll explain to you kind of where I'm coming from. And I haven't been able to put it into words, so we'll see if it comes across well. But right now, in this current time, I have a dad who was my father, my earthly father. And he was a troubled man from the beginning. And then he brought family into his troubles and didn't do very well with that. Being a family, he never stopped being in trouble. He didn't have a moment where he recharted his course, which I think is kind of the theme of this whole thing: is how does a man find purpose, and how do they start, have their yes be their yes and their no be their no, based on some convictions of what they want their tomorrow to look like, and the disciplines of today that kind of get them there. But he didn't take to that. Well, I have a stepbrother. So when I was 11, my mom, kind of in the dark of the night, loaded up a Mazda 626 and with all the stuff we owned, and my uncle was at the wheel and my little sister was at the floorboard of the front seat, and everything we owned was in this Mazda, and we drove from Utah to Washington to start over, but also to get away from my father, who was probably one of the more talented men that I've ever met, but he used all of his time and his treasures for the wrong things. So he had kind of got to a point where we had to run. We had to go. And I could tell a lot of really cool stories where things bigger than me took place that protected me from things that should have not. I would say there's probably between, probably when I was born in 11, I probably should not have made it. And if I did, I should have turned out terrible. However, maybe the best thing he ever did for me is not pursue us after 11. So I didn't get to see my father at all. But recently he got cancer. So I've seen my dad since I was 11. I've seen him in the flesh, I think, twice. And I think I've spoke to him 3 times. And I'm now 43. So, I wrote a book a while back. And in the book, I wrote about drifting, driven, and directed. And those are each 3 categories of life. And in each area of our life, we're kind of sitting in different one of those 3 camps. So when it came to he's still drifting. He never found he kind of went back and forth between being drifted and driven. And drifting is that you haven't found compass. You're just kind of trying it all on. It's what every young man should do. Mm-hmm. They should drift around a little bit and try on some different hats and some different lives and find different mentors in their life, and that should sharpen them. But then they should take to something for seasons and start learning how to become a little bit more direct, driven. And driven usually has an I focus in it, in my mind. Mm-hmm. But it's necessary. It's a part of becoming into your own. So you need to. A lot of us drive towards or away from our parents. So if a pastor's kid might go away from the church and away from what they were raised to because they needed to go. It's not that they necessarily hate their parents for the process, just they needed to see the other side of it and make sure that their faith was their own or their life was their own. And I think we all do that. Yeah. And it's a directed path. It can be professional direction. It could be athletic direction. It could be pretty much any major thing that you decide to become highly focused on it, it requires a level of selfishness. And then you get to a point in your life when you need to probably surrender of that and move into this directed, where you need to start living and doing and behaving in a way that's unbecoming of the world, but more towards your purpose in life and who you're supposed to be and the impact you're going to make. At least that's my thoughts. So going back to my dad, he never found that third level. And I think as a father, I think that was something that I learned from my dad. And then I had a stepdad, and then I have another stepdad now. My mom had been married 3 times. The third one is a sweetheart. I love him to death. He's still married to my mom now. Just in my house last night. And he brings a level of stability to her life. So each of my dad's earthly fathers taught me something in their time in my life.
Yeah.
And they taught me stuff that I wanted to be like, and they taught me stuff that I did not want to be like. So I think one thing that I would say, like if there's an audience that's trying to figure out how to raise up a man who comes into his own and maybe finds his own faith and finds his own compass and can lead his family and take that legacy that he started and build upon it, which is I think what every father wants. Of course, we want our kids to be content and all those other things, but let's be honest, we don't want our kids to be without purpose and mission.
Yeah, 100%.
So the first dad taught me a whole bunch of what I didn't want to be. So I spent almost every decision I make. I didn't have a lot of decision fatigue as a young person because I knew black and white. I knew exactly what I did not want. So I made every decision based on the opposite of what I didn't want. It was very easy. So like, when alcohol came into practice, I didn't want to give it in drunkenness because I saw that. And I had seasons with it, but it never brought out the best in me, and I could feel the conviction in me that it wasn't for me. So as soon as I was able to come into my own and have enough discipline to say yes and no to things and not follow the crowd or whatever, alcohol became something that I didn't need to have in my life. And then when I was about 35, I actually was able to take it out of my life altogether. So it took me some time. And,
Sure.
I could feel it as a young man, but it took me some time of different types of path. But now it's a forever decision, which I can talk about a ton about what it looks like to practice extreme discipline with your faith at the center, so that, when the craving of the thing comes, when you can replace that craving with the provision of something else that's like a father in heaven. It's really a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Even one of the best parts of my faith, if you will, is being able to come against the tension that is the discipline and be able to find a bigger why that makes the other thing inconsequential and kind of removes it from the
right. You have
forefront of your mind.
You have that grounding, that
Right.
foundation, that cornerstone that you go back to for your decision making. And when you're met with something in front of you that doesn't feel right, or that temptation towards something like drinking, you can go back to that cornerstone, that foundational piece, and go, oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I don't know if this will I don't want to bounce around too much, but it's kind of how my brain works. So
No, please.
But I was watching a video about one of the most famous golfers that we have in our time, and he was being interviewed kind of like we are now, and the interviewer asked him a question, and you saw him kind of he had a response, and then he went with the shallow response and kind of gave it, and the guy was like, "What were you going to say?" And he's like, "Well, I don't really. I'm going to nerd out if I answer it," type of thing. And he's like, "No, we'd love to hear it." And he talked about this idea that, he was talking about hitting with a sand wedge or a wedge, and he was talking about how he'd hit the wedge so many times that he could tell by the temperature in the morning and the dew and the lie of the ball, and he would adjust it. And he knew he can go 135 yards with this club every day. And then he said if he needed to go 137 yards, he would hit it different, so it would roll. And if he needed to come back, he'd hit it different. And he broke it down like a scientific process where he took a swing and made it a thing of art and science. And he said how he was able to do that. He was able to come to he knew what the club could do, and then he could build from there. He can modify the swing. He could make changes. I don't know if that's a good analogy for you guys, but for me, it was like, I see what he's saying there, that if you put yourself to a practice with enough discipline over time, you'll start to learn to trust it.
Yeah.
And I think that trust is probably a trust of self. If you learn how you behave in that space, if you've overcome the adolescence of indecision and vacillation and whatever, and you're learning how to say, like, this is the kind of guy I am here. Now you can expand on it and make it better. So for me, I've learned that that's kind of a thing you can do in any part of your life.
Yeah.
So my first dad, one of the things about him that I loved is he was a hard worker. And he wasn't just a hard worker, he was hard on anybody around him, and you must be a hard worker. He wasn't always my friend with that, and I don't think I liked him for it, but I respected him to a degree because I always knew that he had the ability to do whatever he put his mind to. He just couldn't put his mind to things without being dishonest.
Yeah.
So I took that and I used it, and it served me my whole life to be, no one's going to outdig me. If we're on a hole, I'm going to outdig you. I don't care if you're better than me or not. I can't not outdig you. It's just the way I'm wired. And it's not a competition against you. It's just I'm not going to not carry my load. I'm going to make sure that I've showed up and I've dug the hole adequately to your pace and more.
Yeah.
Just because it's just the way I'm wired. And I think he taught me that. He also taught me that there's lots of ways to approach a thing. Again, he used most of his talents. I think God gives everybody talents and treasures. And the treasure is found in the talent, and the talent is found in the treasure. So it's this really cool dynamic that over time they become a thing, but they are separate. But it's a kind of a cool dynamic. But he never could he was using the talents he was given, but he wasn't investing them. He was taking from something with them. And I learned that if you brought your talent to something in the form of an investment, and with the idea of multiplication, that anything would grow around you. And if you're that person, you'll always be invited back. You'll be picked on the team. It's valuable, and it doesn't even require skill. It's just this dedication to putting your best effort into what you're doing.
Right, and I've seen that in the way that you. Because I came to you probably 16 years ago for our first home loan.
Yeah.
And at that time, you were talking about these things, talents and treasures. And I remember, I think it was maybe our third time that we talked, that you said, hey, what do you make of this, talents and treasures? And you were asking that question. And every time that I met with you, you had some question that related to leadership, philosophies, and faith. And so I see that in the way that you engage in your business and with the Cadre Concept, which we can get into a little bit. But just the way that you do life, you can see that you're bringing others with you, and that you're offering something. You're offering your talents and gifts. This is what I have. This is what I'm going to bring you. And there's no, and you come at it at 100 miles an hour with no apologies. And I love that.
I think I learned that from the Bible. I think that's what it calls it. I think we're called to that. And we all going to find our own measure of that, right? But
yeah,
there's a story when a gal comes and she gives her last cents to the offering, and I picture myself standing next to Jesus and the disciples going, "Hey, what's going on here?" I mean, she didn't really, and he said, "No, she gave her best fruit, her last fruit. It wasn't about the size; it was about there was more to that story than just the contribution. It was the attitude and the effort behind it."
Right.
So I've found that attitude and effort, in my mind, are the irreducible minimums that each of us are given, and we're full stewards of. So attitude is usually how you approach the ball, how you approach the game. It's the are you whistling while you work? Are you complaining? Are you quick to surrender and join in, or do you come in with an entitlement? I mean, there's so many ways to look at an attitude, and like Jesus says, you've heard it, and I would say it's like this. And there's this way where you can move from one dynamic and move to a new, and inside of that, in my mind, it's all about attitude. It's all about they say
the condition of your heart. Yeah.
From the mouth flows the heart and I think attitude is a really good representation of the conviction of who you are inside of you, because you can approach anything with the attitude that you choose. And attitude also is your response to things. So like if I come up and kick you in the shin, you're gonna whatever you do after that is up to you, and it's your responsibility. So if you return that kick with another kick, that's your decision, not mine. I didn't cause that. I did what I did, and that's my job, and your response is yours. So attitude is a really really it's a wellspring of character development. So you always get better at it in time. But attitude is your response, and it's holistically yours. It's yours to steward, good or bad. And then effort is effort's a kind of a cool thing because it's a, they say, what is the force what is the equation for force? It's like,
mass times acceleration, something to that.
Yeah.
Divided by 2.
Bailed me out. So the idea would be is both sides have measure. So like you can come at something with effort, and it could be, like the story of Rudy, where he was ill-equipped to be in the game, but he compensated it by a will and determination that he played bigger than his size. So you could come at effort that way, or you can come at effort where, I remember Kobe Bryant used to always make fun of Shaq, and he was asked this question that said, man, if Kobe had the work ethic that you wanted him to have, what could you guys have done? And he was like, we would have never lost. The man was the most talented man ever, but he didn't have what I had. He didn't have the hunger because he was a giant. He didn't need it. He had both. He could have, he's like, I would have won all the championships. And I think some people are given the mass, and then they got to learn how to bring the effort to it. Some people are given the effort, they got to learn how to bring the math to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a very good descriptor, but attitude and effort are important.
Yeah, definitely. This is something I talk about with my boys a lot. And in regards to sports is a good place for creating these analogies. And, there's some guys whose athletic potential their ceiling may be, let's just say 10 foot high. And my kids, maybe their ceiling is 8 foot high on their God-given talents and abilities. However, if their effort is at a rate that they get to their 8 foot, and that guy's effort's at a rate and he only gets to 7.5, well, you can see what that effort brings, right? And so I can't ask any more of my kids, and we can't ask any more of anybody than their effort, right? The 100% effort, we can't ask for more. You can go out and practice, but there is going to be a ceiling to that. So
Yeah. Well, what's kind of interesting about comparison, right? What you just did, it's the thief of joy, right?
Yeah.
It steals your joy of your progress because you're comparing against where they are instead of where you've come from.
Yeah.
And it robs you of where you came from. So you mentioned Cadre Concept a while back, and I think it, we'll see how this all shapes out. I apologize that I'm covering so much ground, but one of the things that I came to understand in the pursuit of my greatness, and then in pursuit of just changing my trajectory and taking responsibility for more things in life, again, none of that means that I was successful or not successful. It just means that how I chose to approach my best effort as being my standard.
Sure.
And then getting better every day. So I kind of have like this 1% better every day philosophy in every aspect of my life. I try to always be open to better, not just better in comparison, but better in comparison to my yesterday.
Yeah.
Could I do this a little better? Like I was a yeller when I first got married because I was modeled that. Well, my conviction, I knew that yelling was not conducive to the man I wanted to be. And my wife knew that too. But I had to reframe myself to where my action, I needed to be able to take the tone and the anger and the yelling out of a communication style. Well, that's a challenge. It comes with repetition and humility and getting raised up and then coming back off that and not going to the other chapter of that anger.
Right.
And over time, I was able to actually find measure in my own talent and get better each time. But it was a big thing for me. It was like a God-sized problem. So I had to one bite at a time, and I had to surrender a little bit more each time. And it took me about 3 or 4 years, and my marriage started to move away from that being what I brought to it. I started to learn. I mean, I still had to work on it, but I was learning how not to be a bully with my communication. But it took time, and I had to surrender to the process.
Right. Instead of just saying, this is who I am. I mean,
which is what a lot of men do. Is
yeah.
Say, I'm not going to make excuses because I'm not willing to have the discipline and surrender of change.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So it's good to know that, even later in life, that we can make those course corrections and be who we want to be instead of just resigning or tapping out, right?
Well, I think if this faith is okay to talk about, and it's the only way I can communicate
Yeah.
these kind of questions. To me, I think God modeled this idea of how do I say it, like being renewed of spirit. Like you can actually let completely go of yesterday. You don't even have to do it the same way at all. So a lot of us men get caught up in this idea that their way of being man is that they put their foot down in some areas, or they've drawn hard lines, or some of those are valuable things that each of us need to establish. But there's a delivery method where the hard line may be a shallow line that doesn't have the depth, and because you don't go past the line, you don't get to see the depth. So I think there's a great value in learning how to let go of yesterday and not try to do it like you did yesterday.
Yeah, sure.
Actually do it better today.
Yeah.
In almost every aspect of life.
Yeah. Shannon, I wanted to go back a second because at the very beginning, you talked about you guys got car and left.
Yeah.
People don't do that unless there's do you feel comfortable in telling us the reason why?
Yeah, I mean, what's really cool about that season is I fully own it now. And I recognize that things happened to me, but I was a recipient of those things. I wasn't causing them myself. And that was a good part of leaving yesterday and forgiving those people in that story, was that I had to recognize that everybody's active role. For me, I was an 11-year-old boy, and I had a brother that was like 8 and a sister that was 5 or something like that. So they were young and adolescent, and I was just old enough to understand. And my dad was beating up my mom on a regular, and he was cheating on her, and he was living with another woman, and he was smuggling drugs across the border, and we had people die in our driveway. I mean, the amount of stories I could tell, each one of them, in my opinion, are traumatic enough for counseling.
Right.
And that was a daily practice in my world. So we left because there was no other choice. There was our physical, we were being threatened with death and violence and different things that were happening on a regular basis. My mom was getting beat up, and it was time. And the only thing you could do is just reposition yourself. I mean, the courage she had to have taken to leave everything she knew and start new, I mean, just was wonderful. I'm very proud of her.
Yeah.
It was a really cool thing. But yeah, we had to start new. So we moved, and we upgraded to a trailer, like an RV, that was hooked to an extension cord to another trailer that was with my aunt's house. And the RV was gutted, and there was just a bed, and 4 of us. That's where we made our.
Wow.
So it was really interesting. It was the first 5 or 6 years in Washington were terrible. And then I had my second dad come into the equation at that time, and my mom. What drives my mom is security. At least it was at the time, especially since my dad offered her no security.
Yeah.
So this next guy offered her an emotional security that she never had. He madly in love with her. Unfortunately, he didn't have the manliness of provision. So he provided plenty of emotional support and love and lust and romance and all that stuff that I think is really important to a marriage, but he didn't provide the other part. So from my dad, I learned the manliness of, digging a hole and taking pride in that and doing something hard and not being afraid of that. And then from my second dad, I learned the other side of it. I learned he wasn't modeling the other side, so I wasn't going to get that, but he was modeling, man, he loved my mom. I mean, he loved her a lot. He didn't love her enough to be the man he was supposed to be. He didn't love her enough to avoid drugs. He didn't love her enough to avoid violence. Didn't love her enough to honor her kids, but he loved her, and it was very clear. So I learned a lot about that with him, but I was becoming a man when he was in my life. So he couldn't quite be the bully that my first dad could. And I remember there was a moment when, things in my family had gotten kind of rough again. It's interesting. Some of the misery tends to repeat itself if you keep doing it the same way. Keep making the same decisions, even if they look different. So anyways, it got to a point where I was kind of a young man. I was probably about 16, maybe 17, and I was held back a year, so I was kind of older for my classmates. So he was kind of beating up my brother a little bit. So I came out of around the corner, and I'm the oldest, so I joined in, and he and I took over. My brother got out of the way, and I kind of stood in the gap. And I had this amount of anger associated to me that I picked him up and I put him on the ground, and I was in a position where I could do damage to him, and I was afraid of him. And I also respected him because he was my elder, so I stopped. And when I stopped, he beat me up. So I learned I'm not going to stop next time. I mean, you've lost that. So the next time it happened, I didn't stop. And I imposed my manliness on him, and we ended up getting in a pretty big fight, and I think I cracked one of his ribs or something, and kind of beat him up enough to where I couldn't live at the home anymore. It was one man or the other man, and my mom chose the other guy, so it was really hard for me. So I moved out and kind of got started a little early in my life. But what I learned in that season was, being a man has nothing to do with how strong you are. Because I tried that. That wasn't the right response. For anger. Of course, as a young man, I think I needed to stand for myself. I think I had run the course of other people ruling over me in a physical way. So that was kind of cool. Gave me a sense of I was a tough kid then.
Yeah.
So I wasn't gonna let anybody else treat me that way.
Right. And nor should we stand idly by while something like that is happening, right?
Right.
I mean, there's on one side, right? And this is, I mean, it really goes into 10:16 man, be, kind as a dove, shrewd as a snake, kind as a dove. Where, I mean, our greatest intention could be to be kind as a dove, but there's people like your number one and number two dad that are out there and standing by and be like, I put you to the ground and I get off. Well, the reality of most men is if you put yourself in dominance and then allow them the grace to get up, they're going to assert their dominance unless you have finished the deal, right? So I understand, that kindness, right, and that respect, but at the same time, for those people that are listening, I think I think that there is definitely a time to do what you did, and there's definitely a time to, and a realization that you have to go to that level at some time to make yourself and those around you safe.
Well, I think society tells us not to be manly like that, and
They do.
I think I disagree with that. I don't think God gave me a framework of weakness and meekness. I think our bodies were designed, and I think we were designed to be protectors and to be strong and to be resilient. And I think our strength, our fist, is also part of that.
Yeah.
I think there's a great problem with our world where, there's no consequence for action.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be a time when someone would do something in a certain way that was a disrespectful manner, where the other person, they knew that there would be a consequence where I'm not going to kill you or anything, but I might punch you in the mouth.
Right.
And then I might help you up afterwards. But there's going to be a level of like, hey, I'm a man and you're a man. And, if you're going to cross that line of respect, then I'm going to stand up for that.
Yes.
I'm not afraid of that. I've learned that my fist is not how I behave with manliness, but I'm willing to be confrontational with someone, and I'm willing to stand for something, but allow us both to win. And I'm okay if sometimes you don't win.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So, man, I love that what I think is so admirable and awesome for people to listen is that here you are, you have these situations with, Father 1 and Father 2 that are way outside of what you and I want to be and how we believe that a man should be. But you are analytical enough and astute enough and manly enough to go back and go, but I learned something in those situations. And not only did I learn something, the antithesis of what they were doing, but I also found there was good stuff in both of those men.
Right.
They just hadn't quite crossed that threshold, if you will. And they obviously weren't manly men in the way that you and I would define it.
Well, they weren't men of faith.
They weren't men of faith.
And, the word faith is, in my opinion, every man should take hold of that word and really find a way to have faith in a deep, convicted way, because the faith is faith breeds hope, and hope is really powerful for change. Really powerful. It's a catalyst for all things great. Good news is hope. Hope is good news. When you find faith, it's something greater than yourself. It's something you can put faith in. One of the things that I like in faith is I believe things will get better. I believe that things turn out for the good. If there's a dividing line, I think more often than not, things will become better, become good. The world's not decaying. You might be, but the truth is there's better to be had. And faith is usually a part of that. Faith is like this idea that I'm willing to put off for today what I must, or what I have to, or I can run this mile with or without shoes.
Yeah.
I'd rather do the shoes, but I know that in time I'll find the shoes, but I'm not going to not take the action. So I'm going to move forward with what I got. That's faith. Faith starts to learn, on the other side of this thing, there's opportunity that'll open up for you. So I think every man is missing that. I think my first dad and my second dad, my prayer for them still to this day. Okay, so fast forward, I'm 43.
Yeah.
They were in my life when I was before my 20s. They're both in a position in their life where they never did find faith. They never found something. Now they're both degenerates in every aspect of the way. My dad's dying of cancer, as I told you. So his conversation to me, he calls me and we're having this first conversation, like, I don't even know this man. He doesn't know me. He's never seen my kids. He doesn't even, I don't even know if he'd recognize me in the mall. And I know I wouldn't recognize him. He calls me and we talk for 37 minutes. I have a conviction in my heart that I have forgiven this man, and I'm not going to allow, now I have a chance to show that I've forgiven him. It's one thing to say, I've moved on, and to put something out of your mind. It's another thing to be in the moment when you have all the reason in the world to express the pain and suffering or whatever that you want to. I decided that I was going to practice that forgiveness now by actually listening and not having answers to his words, which was very challenging, by the way. But for 37 minutes, he spoke. And when I got off the phone, my wife said, "How was that?" And I said, "Well, it validates a lot for me, because he hasn't spoken to me for 30 years, and he didn't ever ask me a question. He didn't listen from my words. He didn't ask me about anything that was important to me. And he's still the same man that he was. He hasn't figured. He may not be the giant in my life that was ruling over me and emasculating me and doing things that were terrible, but he still hasn't learned that he's not the center of the story."
Yeah. And where is the pain that you have inside you right now, or the emotion that you have inside you? Where does that come from?
I don't know if the word is duplicit, but I'm on both sides of this fence. There's a part of me that wants to jump on a plane, fly down there, insert myself into his story in some kind of a way. Some part of me wants to kick his ass and make my voice heard, and maybe stand a little taller than he is, be a giant in my life, But then the other side of me wants to have no expectations of any kind, but still show up. Be there. When he speaks, he's a child. He's no longer the parent. He's done too much drugs and lived on the wrong side of the track for so long that he's an adolescent in the conversation. Could I be his son when he isn't? He doesn't deserve it, right? So that's the two sides. I'm not sad, and I'm not mad. I'm just don't know how to feel about it. He's dying. He's a man of God. I mean, he's made by God. He's a person, and I'm the son. So I haven't decided yet. And one of my fears is I may not be able to come up with a solid way to respond while I have a choice to respond. On one hand, one of my friends said this to me that I thought was kind of interesting. He said, if you were to write your next book and you were to write about, would you be telling your kids to go see him or not? What example do you want to set? And I'm like, man, it probably is that big of a topic. It probably is. So a big part of how I'm navigating it is I want to express to my children. You ever heard the story of the prodigal son?
Oh, yeah.
What if it was the prodigal dad?
Mm.
It was switched. I think it's still the same guidelines. I think it's still the same. I think the lessons are still there. So what if I were to forgive him all the way and maybe what if I even took care of him? Lord knows I don't want to. Lord knows I don't have the margin for it. But I'd like my kids to take me in if I lose sight of who I am or whatever.
Man.
So I don't know.
If I was your dad, man, I would be overjoyed to have you as a son. And not because of all the things that you've done in life, Shane, but because of you are wrestling with the depth to which you wrestle with being in your dad's life or not, and what it means for your kids. And I'm hearing a lot about what it means for everybody else, but what cost is that for you? And that young 11-year-old boy, and the younger years of going through all that stuff, and how do you love that kid well in your actions today? That's just heavy.
I don't know if there's a good answer yet. We'll see. I love being a dad though. I don't think I was what a great job. I never understood how fathers could not choose to be fathers, or dads. You must be imbalanced. There must be a mental thing inside of you that's, too bad for you. You're missing out on so much. I'm sympathetic for those people.
Yeah.
I'm not empathetic. I don't understand it. I can't relate. I don't get it. I disagree. But I feel bad for you if you can't find a way to strive at. Being a dad draws out the best character you have. Being a dad, I've heard that, until they're about 11 or 12, they listen to everything you say. Of course, they watch you too. You're very influential in their life. And if you watch your kids, you'll see your mannerisms in them. You'll see the way they approach the toilet. You'll see the way they drink out of a cup, and you'll be like, that's the same way I do it. They're watching, and they're learning, and they're growing. And because they're watching, they're learning, they're growing, man, what a great job. And
Yeah.
I'm being watched. They're learning from me, and they're growing because I'm part of that. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I think if the topic of this podcast is how do we raise adolescents into men of virtue and of quality, and that step into the world and bring value to it and don't take from it. Being a father is probably the best training ground to do so. And so I think we should train our boys to be fathers and start teaching them, modeling. Going to the first game of the Mariners every year. The practice is what it is, but the modeling that you're doing with your son, so that he can do that to his son, that's a wonderful tradition. That the character's there. But if I was giving people input on what I believe is the secret sauce to being a dad and raising up boys, is let them fail a lot in your home, and then pick them back up with grace and set them up for failure, actually. Like, have fun with it.
Yeah.
Set them up for failure when it comes to like managing their money, making decisions, joining a team. Every kid joins a team and then doesn't recognize the value of being a team member,
Yeah.
showing up on time and doing the things. And it's fun it's actually good for them to be voted off the team.
Mm.
And I'll tell you one story and then you can kind of take it from there. But my son is a really great soccer player. His mom and I grew up on the side of soccer fields. I never even played soccer, but I love soccer with all my heart because my son loves soccer. And I used to really look forward to taking him to practices and to going to his games and trying to really be in part of that soccer dad piece because I loved watching him grow. I loved watching him shape himself and push and sweat and challenge and all these wonderful virtues I thought he was gaining, and he did gain. But then it came a time where he was on the same team for 6-8 years and the boys kept getting better, and I started to recognize that my son doesn't want to be great at this.
Mm.
He likes it. He loves the people. He enjoys the game. He likes wearing the t-shirt, but he isn't putting the work in. At a certain age in youth sports, you'll see the ones that want it and the ones that feel it and the ones that are starting to lose it. As a father, what a great time to be in that son's life. And, do you push him past it? Maybe you let him, So I got to watch my son not make the team. And I think it wrecked his mother and I more than him in a lot of ways, because I think he had already started making little small decisions that showed me that it wasn't his number one goal, if you will.
Yeah.
He didn't have that killer instinct. He didn't have a ball at his feet all the time. But then the boy across the road did. The boy across the road is now a semi-pro soccer player and traveling the world. And if I would have been betting on the boys or who would have made it, I would have said the other kid. Do I think my son had the equivalent talent? I think he might have if he put the time in. He really was very talented, but he didn't want it. So it's kind of fun to, I thought I kind of wanted it for him for a while.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, dude, you got to give it more effort. I'd get on him and I was kind of berating him at practices, and my wife said, you need to stop doing that. And so I started reflecting on that, and I decided, no, I don't. He needs to feel, I expect him to give his best effort, and if he's not giving it, he ain't gonna get a pass by me. Attitude and effort are required, period. Regardless, if you're on the team, you better show up, otherwise don't be on the team. And I felt like a bad dad at that time. I felt like I was too aggressive, and when we were driving in the car, he'd be like, oh, shit. So I was a little bit too aggressive, but I don't regret it, because I was telling him that I'm despite, like, I love him still, but I'm not going to allow mediocrity. I want him to push himself. If he's going to put on the jersey, I'm going to pay the money for him to be on a select team. He's going to practice every day. He better be in it, and it better show up. Otherwise, let's get on another team or do something different. So I think when men are trying to raise boys to being men, get them to make promises and then help them keep them.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's a big part of being a man, is your yes being your yes and your no being your no.
So if in that moment, if your son would have came to you and said, hey, Dad, I just really don't feel like playing soccer anymore, would you have pushed the same? What would your messaging have been to him then?
I probably would have been proud of him. I mean, sometimes the most courage is saying, stopping doing something like we were just talking about a little bit ago. You don't have to do today what you did yesterday. You're allowed to leave it behind. One cool thing is he kind of did say that to me, but he tried out 2 more times on his own, and he didn't make it either time. And he was crushed each time. But he was crushed by not preparing, not running, not being in shape, not being the best version of himself. I would be like, hey, if you're going to do that, I'll pay for training. Like, you want to go for a run? And he just wasn't taking so then he was setting himself up to go and not make the team. And I could feel it.
Yeah.
So I got to help him do that 3 times, which was pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting that you say he basically said he didn't want to do it, but then he tried out again. And I think sometimes that our boys are, I wonder if there's if they feel an expectation to, hey, my dad wants this. lot. You know, if he feels that like this is really important to my dad, I'm going to give it another shot. I don't love this enough to really give it my effort, all my effort. But what's going on when he doesn't make the team and it crushes him? You know, is it, you know, I didn't meet my dad's expectation? Is it that, gosh, I know I could have done this if I put in some time, and he's starting to put those dots together. And, you know, I mean, that balance between I want it or I don't want it, but I don't want it, but I'm going to still put effort forward. I find myself in those spots in life where I'm in something that I have to be a part of, but my heart's really not in it. And so what everybody else gets out of that is just not very much, right? And I won't be the best or in that spot, and I'm okay with it, because I've got other stuff going on here. But I just wonder where that spot is that we just need to go, you know what? And how we could teach our kids. Yeah, we're right there. How we teach our kids that it is okay to say, well, this is, like you said, I'm going to leave this behind. This is no, I don't want to put in that effort anymore, and I'm okay with that.
I think we need to impart to our children to take agency. I may be your dad, but my job, you showing up and making your mark on it is not my job. It's your job. Agency is taking responsibility for who you are and for your actions and for all the wins and the losses. My son did take a lot of agency. Not necessarily the way that I would have thought, but if I've learned anything about raising a young man, give it a little bit of time and let things come to pass. Most of the times you don't need to say it; it'll come to pass, and then you can be there to, put your finger on the, to accentuate and circle that and be like, hey, that lesson you just learned, that was really good. And even though you wanted to tell them the lesson that they should have been learning, the world has a way of teaching the lesson.
Yeah.
So I got to watch him. I'm very proud of my son. He's wonderful. He's a good guy. He's 18 now. He's a little man.
So he's a senior then?
No, he's a junior. He's got to go back also.
Oh, okay.
So he gets another year in my house being a man, which I love. I can't wait. I'm gonna have a chance to help him make a lot of adolescent/adult mistakes.
Yeah.
That some parents don't get that. So he's going to have an interesting life where he's going to be both a child going to school, but a man, and he's going to have to learn, and I'm going to have to learn how I'm like. For instance, I have expectations about curfew and when he's going to be home and what that looks like, but he also gets a say in that now, in a different way. But he doesn't get a lot of say because he's still in school
and in your house.
Mm-hmm. But he should have a role in that because he gets to make decisions. So like, I'll give you an example of something that I'm kind of proud of he and I for doing. Tomorrow I told him I wanted him. So on Monday I said, hey, I need your help on Wednesday. It's the first time I've ever done this. I want you to take a look at your grades, take a look at your, what you have on your docket. And I want you to take Wednesday off and come work with me. What I'm doing is I'm doing a couple things. I'm asking him to he should say no if he has to, because I still expect his grades to stay. I still expect his role, that job is his first job. So I'm giving him the chance to step away from his job and make a good decision and, come and do something different. Well, he didn't answer me Monday, and he said, I got to talk to my other. So he actually is like putting an effort. He's talking to his teachers. He's telling them he wants to take Wednesday off to go work with his dad. And he's inviting his teachers into this dynamic of him becoming a man. So he calls me this morning and he says, hey, I want to come work with you. And my friend's going to come with, and he's going to talk to his mom first, but we'd like to take the day off of school. Well, in my family, you go to school. That's what you do. That's your job. If you suck at that, your life's going to be difficult. I don't expect perfect grades, but I expect best effort. So now that I'm inviting him to take time out of his job to do something different, it's wonderful because he's 18. He can actually make a man decision about that. And it may seem small to others, but to me, it's really cool.
Yeah.
To make that decision in front of me.
Yeah.
And see him take responsibility for his school, but also, he's not sloughing off.
Yeah.
He's not giving into adolescence and being stupid and neglecting his responsibility. He's actually taking both responsibilities serious, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Yeah, I actually had a similar thing, and it seems small, where my son has his friends, his cousins that he plays ball with. They are a year or two older than him, and so he was always kind of the youngest of the group on his teams, and they were moving up to the next level, and he was still 2 years away from, for his age matching that level that they're at. And he's like, well, Dad, I want to move up with them. And, he had some emotional, I think, emotional control issues when, at that moment in time. And I was open with him about that. I didn't care for him. He was just letting things like striking out or not hitting it as far as he wanted to take control of his emotions. And so I talked to him about that and so I called my mentor and I said, hey, what do you think about this? Should I allow him to go up? Because there's a good chance that he's not going to perform the way that he wants to if he moves up a level and, he doesn't have great emotional control yet. And he's like, well, first of all, I don't think this is a really big issue. But it's a good teaching opportunity. Sit down with him, ask him why he wants to do it. What are the pros and cons to both? And so we had this honest discussion. Yeah, I'd be probably the top of my team if I stayed down. If I'm up here, I probably won't be. And then we had, but he saw it as a pro that he wasn't going to be the best, which was an indication to me that he was ready to do that, because he was like, well, I just see it as a challenge, and these kids are going to be bigger and faster and stronger than I am, but I think that's a positive thing. And I said, but the other component of it is that you need to be able to manage your emotions. Not saying that, I think crying is okay. I mean, it's a legitimate response, but how much do you allow those emotions to now dictate how you treat people, how you step up to the plate, how you hold yourself? Like for those young kids, crying is an absolutely appropriate response.
I think crying is an appropriate response for everybody.
Yeah, I do too.
But crying out of a emotional intelligence that's not intelligent, maybe that's a wasted effort. But I agree with you. I think we should have a lot of emotion. I think one of the greatest, a lot of things about, how people get through their life is their mindset. And emotions are a big part of how that mindset takes shape. So I think it's really cool that he's having a chance it shows that he has fire in his belly.
Yeah.
He's competitive. He's willing to put himself in environments where he may not be readily be available now. But if you look at the key indicators of people who did rise, who did get drafted out of the NBA, into the NBA out of high school and skip some stuff, the ones who went on to do well, they were emotional too, but they also had something inside of them that made them better. It sharpened, it drove, it created something in them.
Yeah.
And some of the greatest athletes ever learned how to kind of do it alone because they had to, they did it the hard way in effect.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the cool thing is that he made that decision to move up, and
so you ultimately let him.
Yeah, we let him make that decision. And
this year,
and that was a few years ago actually, and he struggled at the beginning a little bit. And the day that I wasn't there, he changed. He kind of flipped that script, and he ended up with like the best batting average, best on base percentage of that year. And I say that only because it took a lot of work for him. And then I won't get into details of it, but he chose to be on a select team a couple years after that. And he's not doing it anymore, but his first tournament that he played in with them, he got an award from the coach because he was had the most emotional control, and that's what his coach was looking for in that tournament. And so, number one, to have a coach that was looking at creating character over performance was my first like kudos to that coach. And then the second was like, hey, that's pretty cool, buddy. Because I don't really care honestly how, what level he reaches. Like you, I care about effort and heart, but character is the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that's how we are called. Every one of us are called to be of agency and character. And I think we got to raise our sons in that way. And whether or not he was a star of that team or sat on the bench, he was in the game.
Right.
He was playing and he was putting himself out there, and he was, he dressed himself and put stuff on. He took his gear with him, and he got in the arena.
Yeah.
So that's probably enough. However, don't get in the arena and then sit in the corner.
Yes.
Your best effort.
Yeah. Amen.
And see what you can do, and maybe you can do better than you think. And in some environments, they'll, like this story, he excelled. The next one, he may not, but he'll still have, the same character will have got him into both spaces.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. I think a man needs to do that. If I had to attribute anything that I gained from my rocky start, is that at some point I had to recognize that the things that happened to me were no longer my responsibility. What I was going to do with my life became my responsibility. So I think each of us got to teach our children to take upon themselves their own faith and their own agency and their own goals. And then we need to come alongside them instead of be in the front of them. The second part of being, when they cross that 11, 12, they start listening, they start watching what you do and not listening to what you say.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, that goes into their young adolescence, until they have a life event where they can start to relate to you. Maybe they have a kid, or they get married, or they get one of those jobs. It's kind of an adult job. And then they start going, oh, he was right when he's, I saw him packing his lunch and now I get it. I saw him showing up and reading his Bible and now I understand that. Then they start to listen again. They start to look for advice. But there's that season when they get out of the adolescence, the coming. Now it's about watching you and watching the way you treat their mother, watching the way you show up. So I think there's some really cool things that men can do to model that. And I think that, maybe we can leave them with the audience with a couple of those things that I think have been good. In my mind, a morning practice that is apart from your family. It's about that solidarity of the man being alone, quiet, and reading, exercising, studying, stretching, being still, not having your phone in your hand, but having your mind at the forefront and breathing, and that process of self-development, developing a morning routine for self-development. That's a wonderful thing to pass down to your child. And they won't get it until they get it. And when they get it, they're going to speak of it as an earmarking thing that you did. There was this short story, but there was a guy that ended up being a big, huge bodybuilder. And he said that the reason he became a bodybuilder is because every day at 6, he could hear the clinking of the weights in his garage. And he wanted to be a man like that.
Yeah.
That's what got him started. And that's what gave him the passion for this. And he went on to be really successful in a lot of spaces. But every morning he heard his dad clanking in the garage. And I think that's a wonderful thing to model, not to say, but to do.
Yeah.
Love your wife. They're going to treat their wife and they're going to learn, man, what a great opportunity for you to develop some dating habits with your wife, develop some communication habits, money habits, things like that you can do with your wife and alongside your wife, and let your boys see you be a man and honor their mom, the way you treat her, the way you regard her. Like in my family, I pitch my wife's butt at every chance I get. My wife is my dream girl. So I go out of my way to let her know that she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. And she really is. And I really believe that. It's like, I'm lucky. She checks every box I've ever had, and she continues to do so. And now I'm seeing him date. And he's a booty guy, just like me. I see his modalities. I see the way he treats her. He's still adolescent, so he's like still punching her and farting her on her and doing stupid stuff. But he's also honors her with certain things. And I'm like, I think that I modeled some of that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Love their mom, develop a routine for self-development. And then I think another one is learning how to be present. I think if a man can show their son what presence looks like, that's a wonderful thing to pass to the next generation, because the presence is, if you were to whittle down the key to community, it's being present. It's just being with other people without expectation, and just learning how to be empathetic and hang out and have joy in each other's fellowship.
Mm.
If your boy can learn that, just think about his relationship with his boss. Think about the relationship with his coworkers and his teammates and his friends. I mean, he learns how to be present with people. It's a wonderful virtual to bring. So I think, for anybody who's raising a teenager, don't worry about how much you say. Worry about the man you are in front of them. And then there'll be a time when they'll start asking you questions about those practices, and that's when you'll get to say and teach. So I really do believe that my first dads taught me. My second dad used to always say, "You will respect me," and I learned that I want my actions to say, "You will respect me," not my words, because his words and his actions never were in alignment. I never could respect him because he wasn't a man worthy of respect. And my third dad is a man worthy of respect. He acts, he sets a standard, and he runs himself in a certain way. And he and I don't have the same styles, but he's a man that he doesn't have to tell me to respect him. I already do.
Yeah.
So I think that, I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Well, Shane, it's been an honor, and I'm blessed to be here with you today. And I really appreciate your lessons that you've taken and learned and now are giving. And I just feel like that's kind of part of who you are, and probably just flows off your tongue and your mind, as easy as breathing.
Well, when you're a student for a long period of time, you do get the opportunity to be a teacher. And now that I'm 43, I think I'm okay with the teacher label.
Yeah.
I've read all the books. I've made a lot of the mistakes. I've seen a lot of things. And I'm starting to get comfortable with adding value as it pertains to wisdom. I have some to give, and I still have some stuff to learn. But
yeah. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.
All right.